Hey guys, tonight we slip into a story stitched together from scraps of paper, smudged ink, and the soft weight of promises made across oceans. You're sitting in a drafty barracks somewhere far from home, the air carrying a mix of damp wool, shoe polish, and the faint tang of seawater. Outside, boots clomp across wooden planks, the creak of the ship in the harbour, reminding you that departure is not a hypothetical, it's coming. Your fingers hover over the paper, pencil poised, because somehow you have to turn everything you're feeling into words that fit on a single page. You probably won't survive this, not in the tragic sense, but in the way that no one survives love without being changed by it. The war has already stripped life down to its bare bones. A letter is one of the few things you can still make beautiful. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The letter starts simple. Dearest. You stare at that single word until the pencil point dulls. Dearest who? Dearest friend? Dearest girl you met only twice before shipping out? In wartime, titles become elastic. You might call someone sweetheart without ever having kissed them, because the world feels too fragile for strict definitions. Your hand trembles slightly, not from fear, but from the cold. The barracks heater has been out since yesterday, and you can see your breath when you exhale. A bunkmate shuffles by, tucking a photograph into his shirt pocket. The image is bent at the corners, as if it's been thumbed 1,000 times. You press the pencil harder, writing about things you think will matter. The gulls wheeling over the dock, the smell of coffee brewing in the mess, the way the ocean looks silver before sunrise. You leave out the fear. Historians still argue whether letters like these were more for the sender or the receiver, whether they were love in action or simply a way of convincing yourself that you still belonged somewhere beyond the war. Every so often you pause to chew the eraser, wondering if you've said too much or too little. You don't dare mention where you're stationed. That would be blacked out by the censors anyway. The army has a whole department dedicated to slicing away your secrets with scissors, turning some soldiers' letters into ghostly skeletons of what they once were. Your bunk creaks as you shift, thinking about the quirks that have slipped into your correspondence. Maybe you draw little doodles in the margins, a crooked coffee cup, a clumsy heart, a cartoon of your sergeant yelling. Some men sprinkle sand from the beach into the envelope, so the person back home can feel the grit under their fingertips. There's a joke that goes around: the longer the letter, the shorter the romance. You're not sure it's true. You've seen men spend hours crafting a single page, folding it like origami before sliding it into an envelope, as if the neatness of the corners could somehow carry their sincerity. When you finally sign your name, it feels both final and inadequate. You blow gently on the page to dry the ink, though it's pencil, an old habit from home. The letter will travel thousands of miles, changing hands so many times it will pick up new smells. Engine oil, rope fibre, maybe the faint floral soap from some clerk's desk in the postal room. Tomorrow you'll drop it into the mailbag without ceremony. No one applauds a soldier for writing home, but somewhere, days or weeks from now, someone will slit open that envelope, trace your handwriting with their thumb, and for a moment, the war will shrink to the size of a single sheet of paper. And for you, alone in that drafty barracks with the sound of the harbour creaking through the night, it's enough to keep your heart warm until morning. The train platform is a strange kind of stage. You stand there, boots planted on the cold concrete, steam curling around your legs like something alive. It's late enough that the electric lamps glow with a tired yellow light, their halos fuzzy in the damp air. The rails hum faintly, carrying vibrations from a train still miles away, and every so often the whistle's long, mournful note slices through the quiet. You're not expecting to meet anyone here. You're just another soldier with a duffel bag at your feet, counting the hours until you're shipped off again. And yet, out of the corner of your eye, you catch the flicker of movement, a civilian coat in a sea of uniforms. She's clutching her own small case, the fabric of her gloves worn thin at the fingertips. It happens like it always seems to in these stories, a shared glance, quick enough to dismiss, but strong enough to pull you back for a second look. You both smile, polite, almost embarrassed. Historians still argue whether wartime romance happened more often out of genuine connection or sheer desperation. Either way, the results look remarkably similar from the outside. The whistle grows louder, and she takes a small step toward you, maybe by accident, maybe not. You're close enough now to catch the faint smell of perfume, something floral but diluted by the chill. You make a comment about the weather, and it's nothing clever, but she laughs anyway, brushing her hair back from her face in a way that feels both practiced and unthinking. A porter shouts, his voice bouncing off the station walls, and a gust of steam swallows the space between you. You ask where she's headed, and she answers vaguely as though she's not sure she wants to commit to the truth. Maybe it's modesty, maybe she just doesn't trust strangers in uniform. The quirky part of all this is that wartime train stations often became accidental matchmaking hubs. There were even informal meet and greet corners in some busy stations, places where Red Cross volunteers, servicemen and locals mixed, sometimes only for the length of a delayed train. You notice her case is scuffed, one of the latches bent. She notices the frayed seam on your sleeve. You both pretend not to be embarrassed by the signs of wear. The truth is, everyone is worn these days. The train pulls in, brakes screeching, car doors banging open. You both hesitate, half lost in the fog. There's a moment where you could say something more, offer an address, promise a letter, but the crush of passengers surges between you. You step back. She steps forward, and then, by some quiet miracle, you catch sight of her through the window as she finds a seat. She presses her palm to the glass just briefly, like a tiny salute. You raise your hand in return. When the train lurches forward, you stand there long after the tail lights vanish. The concrete feels colder now, the steam less romantic. But in your pocket you find the folded scrap of paper she must have slipped there when you weren't looking. No name, just a line of an address. A place you've never been. You smile to yourself. Maybe the war will take you near it someday. Or maybe it won't. But tonight, as you sling the duffel over your shoulder and turn toward the waiting room, the platform feels just a little warmer. The hall glows even before you step inside, a buttery spill of light escaping through high windows, softening the blackout curtains into warm silhouettes. You push open the door, and the smell hits, floor wax, damp wool, a suggestion of perfume that rode in on somebody's scarf. The gramophone crackles, then steadies, and a trumpet leans into a melody you half know from the radio, a tune that sounds like a smile with its tie loosened. Your boots hesitate on the threshold, those same boots that marched you across parade grounds and train platforms, now suddenly unsure what to do with a dance floor. You check your cuffs, smooth your jacket, and tell yourself you're just here for the music. That's what you said about writing just one letter, remember? The one that somehow turned into a whole conversation stitched across weeks. The hall is busy but not crowded. People are scattered like notes on a staff, partners finding each other by instinct. Strings of paper lanterns droop from the rafters, their colours dulled by wartime dye shortages, but still pretending to be festive. On stage, the bandleader raises an eyebrow as if he's personally responsible for your posture. The drummer counts them in with a flourish that suggests he's been saving his wrist for this exact moment. And then you're moving, or at least your uncertainty is moving you. One step two, a careful turn to avoid a pair gliding past like they rehearsed in the mirror. Here's a solid, mainstream truth the music will confirm for you. Wartime dance halls and USO canteens became the social arteries of entire cities, pumping companionship where loneliness had started to clot. By 1942, USO dances in the United States and abroad were weekly rituals. Glenn Miller's swing could turn a room into helium, lifting every heart an inch higher than it had been that morning. You feel it in your shoulders, the way the horn section unties knots the army never could. Someone taps your elbow. Care to? The voice is gentle, amused. You turn, and it's the person who'd smiled at you earlier from across the refreshments table, the one with the careful hair and the not at all careful grin. It's the kind of grin that suggests mistakes might be made and nevertheless treasured. You bow. Why are you bowing? Because apparently the part of your brain responsible for etiquette woke up tonight wearing an old-fashioned suit. You step out together, the floor a soft map underfoot. The band slinks into a foxtrot, and your feet remember how to be promising rather than precise. Your partner's hand is light on your sleeve, confidence radiating through fingertips, steering you without making a point of steering you. You know just enough to keep from apologizing every third step. Still, you throw in a joke. I have 2 left feet, but one of them passed basic training. They laugh, which you decide to take as encouragement rather than politeness. The hall's quirks come into focus. Someone has chalked the floor lightly, an old trick to control slipperiness, and a dusting like ghostly snowfall clings to trouser cuffs. Near the back wall, a volunteer keeps a dish of bobby pins and safety pins for emergencies, a wartime practicality that saves hemlines and reputations alike. You catch the eye of the matron at the door who, rumour has it, can read the temperature of a room and lower it with a single look. And in a far corner, a handmade sign declares no jitterbugging. It wobbles on a string every time the bass player gets enthusiastic. Was jitterbugging really banned? Your partner asks during a turn, reading your glance as if thoughts were subtitles. Historians still argue whether those no jitterbug signs were strict rules or just suggestions to appease nervous hosts. You nod sagely the way people do when they're learning and pretending they knew it already. Truth is, in some places the signs had the force of a scolding. In others, they were a wink that said, keep it tidy and nothing breaks. You pass the refreshments table, its offerings heroic in their restraint. Weak punch, weaker coffee, and cookies that taste like somebody's stretched butter with hope and ration cards. You take a cup anyway, because holding something gives your free hand a job, and because sipping is a socially approved way to stall while your pulse returns from its reconnaissance mission. The band slides from foxtrot to a slow ballad, and the room changes temperature by a few degrees, the way it does when a story pauses after the first cliffhanger. Your partner looks up at you, one eyebrow raised like a question, gently posed. We can try the close kind, they say, the close kind. You blink, then step forward into the architecture of a slow dance, where posture matters less than proximity, and the clock suddenly forgets how to tick in even seconds. You're aware of your breathing, of the faint linen scent at the collarbone near your cheek, of how a thumb brushing your wrist can be louder than a trumpet. You're also aware that you are not, by any measure, an expert, but the new accuracy you develop, measuring not inches but comfort, is the kind the army never taught and the world always needs. A friend loops by, gives you a comical thumbs up, then nearly collides with a column. You stifle a laugh. Joke 2 arrives automatically. If he gets any smoother, the floor will ask for his autograph. Your partner snorts, a delicate, delightful sound that confirms you're allowed to keep being yourself. As the song ends, the applause is soft, more like collective gratitude than celebration. The band takes a short break, the trumpet player loosens his tie, and the drummer flips a stick through his fingers with a small magician's flourish. You wander to the edge of the hall, where an old bulletin board is covered with notices. Knitting circles for the troops, a collection for a hospital fund, a reminder that last train times have changed. There's also a flyer for dance etiquette, a list both quaint and practical. Don't monopolize a partner, mind your shoes, thank the band. And, most charmingly, look happy to be here, it improves the decor. You think about the train platform again, about that brief, fog-drenched moment when a hand met glass and promised nothing and everything. Maybe you'll never see that address again. Maybe you'll write to it tomorrow, your pencil tunneling through the miles. But right now, the hall is its own small country with temporary visas granted by music. A second set begins, livelier. Someone, somewhere, probably the drummer, decides the no jitterbugging sign is a challenge, and the room vibrates at the edge of allowable joy. The two of you try a swing step. Your timing is enthusiastic, if not perfect. At one point, you nearly slingshot your partner into a potted fern that has absolutely seen things and says nothing. You recover, bow theatrically, and deliver joke 3 with all the dignity you can muster. Congratulations, you've survived the advanced course in evasive botany. Between songs, you learn small facts the way people do in the half-light. Their favourite colour has gone out of fashion because the dye is diverted to uniforms. Their aunt keeps a canary to test the gas oven, a family practice from way back that's half superstition, half science. They tell you they once tried to iron a shirt with a hot spoon when the electricity failed. You confess to writing marginal doodles, coffee cups, crooked hearts, on letters you never expect to see again. The sharing feels like a steadying hand on the shoulder. If you step back, you can see the diagram of the room's romance, partners forming, dissolving, reforming, a geometry class taught by saxophone. Some pairs hold close like they're afraid of being misfiled into separate drawers by fate. Others keep a respectable inch of air, as if printed in a manual. Above it all hangs a question bigger than the ceiling. What happens when the music stops? Historians still argue whether these wartime dances were merely pressure valves, state-sanctioned escapism, or something sturdier, communities designing their own small islands where tenderness could be rehearsed and later performed in the lives they hoped to return to. A final waltz is announced, the kind that makes even the cynics inspect their shoelaces for permission. You offer your hand and your partner takes it without ceremony. The room rotates like a carousel seen through gauze. Time loosens its belt another notch. You think of the letters in your pocket and the one that travelled with the smell of lavender. You think of the train windows shining like aquariums for brief captured fish. You think of a future described only in pencil, easily erased, easily redrawn. When the last chord fades, the applause comes with a ripple of relief and reluctance. People thank the band, the volunteers, the matron with the temperature-lowering stare. Coats appear, hats return to heads. The night outside presses at the windows, patient and cool. You find yourselves at the door, where the air has a trace of rain, and the city's far-off hum sounds like a cat purring under the couch. "Thank you," your partner says simply, as if the evening was something you'd both managed to rescue from a burning house. There's a pause where numbers might be exchanged or might not. Wartime has turned certainty into a rationed commodity. No one hoards it. You reach for your pocket and remember the corner-worn photograph your bunkmate tucked close to his heart. You imagine your own breast pocket holding not a face, but a fragment of melody, a proof that you once knew the steps. A Red Cross volunteer squeezes past with a stack of folded tablecloths and whispers conspiratorially, "Come back next week. The band's learning a new tune." You smile, because the promise of a next week is its own kind of miracle. Outside, the lamps are dimmed to compliant halos. You walk a few steps together, then stop where the street forks. "Safe walk," you say. "Safe night," they answer. You both stand there a little longer than necessary, as if waiting for the room to give you one last measure. It does, the echo of laughter rolling out the doors, a faint lick of trumpet that sounds like goodbye, learning how to be gentle. You tip your cap, turn, and start back toward the barracks. On the way, you mutter to yourself that if love is a battlefield, at least here the medals are for grace under rhythm. The line earns you a grin you don't bother hiding. Back at your bunk, you loosen your collar and sit in the quiet where stories draft themselves. When you take out paper, the pencil feels lighter. Even your two left feet seem to write in better cursive. You begin, "About tonight," and pause, listening for the music. It shows up like a friend who never knocks. You write more slowly now, remembering the chalk snow on your cuffs, the sign wobbling when the bass grew bold, the way a hand at your sleeve could be both compass and anchor. By lights out, the letter is folded, edges neat as good intentions. You tuck it beside the photograph you keep, the one with corners softened by persistence. Doesn't matter whether you address it tonight. What matters is that something in you stepped into the light, learned a step, and left the floor more certain than when you walked in. And even if the city sleeps under its careful blackout, you carry your own small glow back to bed, the kind that doesn't need electricity to keep shining. The canteen smells like boiled cabbage, wet wool, and a faint sweetness that might be sugar if you're feeling optimistic. You're in line with a tin tray, boots squeaking faintly on the worn linoleum, the person ahead of you humming something you can't quite place. The line moves in short bursts, 2 steps forward, stop, repeat, and every time you shuffle ahead, you catch sight of the long counter where volunteers ladle out watery stew with the resigned grace of people who know the recipe hasn't changed since the last war. Somewhere between the bread rolls and the dented pitchers of tea, you notice her. She's 2 spots ahead, a scarf tucked loosely around her neck, hair pinned in that quick, functional style that looks accidentally elegant. She turns slightly to pass her tray to the next server, and that's when it happens. Eye contact, just long enough to register and just short enough to make you wonder if you imagined it. The canteen is loud, but in a way that blurs into white noise. Cutlery clinks against tin, chairs scrape, and laughter bubbles up here and there like pockets of heat in the room. Historians still argue whether these wartime canteens were more about feeding stomachs or morale. After all, the portions might be meagre, but the company was a feast in its own right. You grab your bread roll, a little harder than last time, and slide along the counter toward the stew pot. The volunteer behind it gives you a ladleful heavy enough to slosh over the side. You take it as a blessing. It's here, in this exact moment, that you make your move, a small joke about how the stew is strong enough to stand up without a bowl. The woman 2 spots ahead catches it and laughs, a short, surprised sound that feels like a shared secret in a crowded room. The quirky truth? Some wartime canteens actually named their stews after generals or battles, as if giving the dish a heroic title could distract from its questionable flavor. You half wonder what this one would be called. Operation Ladle Overload has a nice ring to it. You find a seat at the far end of a long table, and by some strange orchestration of fate, or maybe just the natural flow of a crowded dining room, she ends up across from you. You both pretend to be absorbed in the challenge of eating stew without dripping it on your uniforms, but there's an occasional glance, a half smile when your eyes meet, and the unspoken recognition that you've both noticed the same absurdity of the meal. It's not a glamorous setting for romance. The overhead lights are a little too bright, the tea is a little too tepid, and the bread is the exact color of old postcards. But something about it works. Maybe it's the unpretentiousness, no candlelight, no violinist, just 2 people, and a mutual understanding that, for now, survival comes with a side of humor. Halfway through your stew, you offer her the salt. She accepts it, like you've just passed over something priceless. Conversation begins in hesitant spoons. Where are you stationed? How long have you been here? The answers are short, not out of secrecy, but because the questions themselves are almost ceremonial, a polite step before anything more personal. From the far corner, a piano strikes up a tune. The player's missing 2 keys, but he's clever enough to dance around them. It's not a love song, more of a marching tune slowed to a friendly amble, but it stitches the room together, loosening the shoulders of every person hunched over a tray. As you finish your bread, you notice she has a small tear at the cuff of her sleeve. She notices your mismatched buttons. There's comfort in knowing you're both a little frayed around the edges. Maybe that's the appeal. Wartime pairs you with people who understand that perfection is not the currency here. The line for seconds has formed by now, though no one's sure if the pot will stretch that far. You rise, tray in hand, and she follows. This time, when the volunteer ladles out the stew, you both lean in at once and say, "Thank you," in unison. It earns you a glance from each other that feels like the first step into a conversation neither of you want to rush. On your way back to the table, you pass the wall of notices, dance nights, knitting circles, lost and found lists. There's a penciled note tacked between two official posters. It reads, "Tea at the corner table, Thursdays at 7. No RSVP, just come." You wonder if she's seen it. You wonder if you'll be there. When you sit down again, she offers you half of her bread roll. It's the smallest gesture, but in a place where sugar is rationed and bread is a constant gamble, it feels like a gift. You take it, nodding your thanks, and decide that sometimes love starts not with a kiss, but with a ladle and a laugh. You're sitting cross-legged on your bunk with a sheet of thin paper balanced on your knee. The barracks smells faintly of boot polish and damp wool, and every so often the wind sneaks through a gap in the wallboards, flicking the paper's edge like it's trying to hurry you along. Outside, the thump of boots and the clink of metal fill the air, but you've learned to tune it out. Tonight is about getting words onto the page, carefully, precisely, because you know this letter will have to survive a journey longer than some soldiers last at the front. It's a V-mail letter, victory mail, a marvel of wartime efficiency and a minor heartbreak in its own right. Instead of sending the whole sheet, your words will be photographed, shrunken down to microfilm, flown across oceans, then printed out again at the other end. The result will be a palm-sized facsimile, your handwriting reduced to something that looks like it belongs in a dollhouse. The paper is thin enough to see your shadow through it, which makes the lines wobble slightly as you write. Historians still argue whether V-mail was more romantic for its novelty or more frustrating, because every flourish, every curve of the pen was reduced to something tiny and impersonal. You lean toward romantic, though it's a romanticism born of necessity. When the alternative is no letter at all, even a miniature one is a victory. The quirky truth? Some soldiers learned to draw tiny cartoons in the margins, knowing they'd shrink down to near invisibility. It was like sending a private joke, hidden in plain sight, the wartime equivalent of a wink. You've tried it once, a crooked coffee cup next to your signature, and you like to imagine the person on the other end squinting at it, smiling just enough to forget the world outside for a heartbeat. You write about the small things you can safely share, the weather, the colour of the sunset over the motor pool, the way the chaplain's dog managed to steal half a loaf of bread right off the kitchen counter. You skip over the location, the troop movements, anything that would get the sensor's scissors twitching. There's a rhythm to it now. Write, pause, think, erase, rewrite. The pauses are longer than the sentences. The censor sits at a desk down the hall, a stack of envelopes to one side, a small metal ruler to the other. You've never seen him smile, but you like to imagine that somewhere, in a drawer he never opens, there's one letter he couldn't quite bring himself to cut. It's a fantasy, but in war, fantasy is a kind of survival. You fold the page carefully, sliding it into the standard issue envelope with its printed passed-by Army examiner box in the corner. You'll leave the box blank for now. The examiner will stamp it later. You lick the flap, tasting that familiar, faintly bitter glue, and press it shut with the side of your thumb. That's when you think of adding something extra. You pull the letter back out, carefully, so you don't tear it, and hold it under your nose. From your pocket, you take a tiny scrap of soap you've been hoarding, the kind issued in rations and just fragrant enough to smell like home if you close your eyes. You rub it lightly along the edge of the paper. The scent is faint, barely there, but maybe it will survive the trip. When you put the letter back in its envelope, the wind rattles the window again like it's impatient to carry your words away. Tomorrow you'll drop it in the mailbag along with dozens of others. Some will go to sweethearts, some to wives, some to people who never write back. And some, like yours, will arrive months later, the war already shifted, the words still stubbornly in the present tense. You imagine her opening it in the kitchen, light falling across the table. She'll run her thumb over the tiny, printed words, maybe tilt the page toward her face until the faint scent reaches her. And for a moment, the miles between you will shrink, not to microfilm, but to nothing at all. Paris smells like wet stone and something sweet you can't name. though it might be chestnuts roasting somewhere down the street. The city hums with a strange mixture of exhaustion and euphoria. It's been liberated for only a short while, and everyone is still learning what freedom feels like when you've been holding your breath for years. You walk beside her down a narrow cobblestone street, the sound of your boots softened by the evening drizzle. Shop windows glow dimly under blackout curtains, pulled halfway back, like shy smiles after too long hidden. A street musician plays an accordion near the corner, the melody waltzing down the alley ahead of you. You glance at her, and she's already looking at you, that half-smile daring you to believe that the war might really end one day. Historians still argue whether the romances that bloomed in liberated cities like Paris were sparks that burned bright and brief, or whether some of them managed to survive the inevitable return to normal life. What they agree on is this: liberation was a heady cocktail, equal parts joy, relief, and the reckless urge to feel alive before the world changed again. She guides you to a cafe that's somehow still standing, its awning patched in places, the tables mismatched but defiantly set with chipped porcelain. The quirky truth: some cafes in Paris, even in 1944, served coffee made from roasted barley or chicory instead of real beans, the shortages too severe for indulgences. You order it anyway because it's Paris and because she's across from you, resting her chin in her hand like there's no one else in the room. The waiter, thin as a shadow, brings the cups with a nod. You sip, and the drink tastes smoky, earthy, and somehow perfect in its imperfection. Rain patters against the awning, and you can almost forget the damage still hiding in the city's corners. Bullet-pocked walls, shattered windows hidden behind cheerful posters. You talk about the things you're not supposed to, how the war has made the world feel both enormous and very small. She tells you about her father's bakery, now reduced to a single working oven. You tell her about the coastlines you've seen at dawn, the way the horizon can look like the edge of everything. There's laughter too, the kind that comes easy when the alternative is thinking too hard about tomorrow. After coffee, you walk again, the streets slick under the street lamps. Somewhere in the distance, bells chime, not the urgent clanging of alarms, but a slow, steady peal that sounds almost domestic. You pause at a small bridge over the Seine, the river glinting like ink in the low light. She leans on the railing, the wind tugging at her scarf. Without thinking, you rest your hand lightly over hers. She doesn't move it away. There's no grand declaration, no kiss in the rain to seal the moment. Just two people standing over a river in a city learning to breathe again. You know you'll carry this memory home. Tuck it into the folds of your mind like a pressed flower in a book, fragile but stubborn enough to last. When you finally walk her to her door, she turns and says something that lodges itself in your chest. It's nice, isn't it, to be alive at the same time? You nod, unable to say more, because somehow that sentence contains both the past you've survived and the future you're still hoping for. You don't make promises, those are dangerous in wartime, but you do walk away with a certainty that for one evening in Paris, love and freedom shared the same small table, drinking coffee that wasn't coffee at all. The night is damp, and the foxhole smells of earth and sweat, a kind of closeness that makes you hyper-aware of every breath. You're crouched low, the rim of your helmet just visible when you glance up, rain dripping off its edge and down the back of your neck. Somewhere to your left, someone curses softly as a match refuses to light. Then with a brief flare against the dark, success. The thin glow of a cigarette tip, small as a star, suspended in the gloom. You pass it along without thinking, fingers brushing as it changes hands. She's there beside you, no romance in the traditional sense, just a shared patch of mud and the fragile warmth of combustion. In the absence of proper walls, moments like these feel more intimate than a ballroom ever could. The quirky truth? In some war zones, sharing a cigarette was less about the tobacco and more about the ritual, an unspoken pact that for the length of a smoke, you were just people, not uniforms, not sides. Even the army doctors admitted that morale sometimes came rolled in paper. You both lean against the side of the hole, boots sinking into the sludge, listening to the distant thump of mortars. They're far enough away not to demand movement, but close enough to keep the air taut. You take a drag, the smoke harsh and slightly damp from the rain, and you exhale slowly, watching it vanish into the cold. Historians still argue whether foxhole friendships, those intense, fleeting connections forged under fire, ever translated into something lasting once the war was over. Some did, finding their way into peacetime letters and reunions. Others evaporated the moment the mud dried. But right now, with the cigarette making its rounds, the question doesn't matter. She hands it back, her fingertips cold, the embers glow reflecting in her eyes for a second longer than it should. You offer a grin, small, tired, but real. She returns it, the kind that acknowledges the absurdity of the situation. Overhead, the rain slackens, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Somewhere down the line, a voice murmurs a joke you can't quite catch, but it sparks a ripple of quiet laughter. You imagine what this would look like to someone above ground, tiny pinpricks of orange light barely moving in a dark landscape, like a constellation no one will ever chart. When the cigarette burns low, you stub it out carefully in the mud, saving the butt. Tobacco's too precious to waste. You don't say anything about how the shared smoke felt like a lifeline, because that would sound strange in the middle of the night, surrounded by mud and steel. But you know it's true. Eventually, you both shift, hunching deeper into the foxhole, collars turned up against the chill. The world narrows to the sound of your breathing, the distant percussion of artillery, and the faint warmth still lingering on your fingertips. You might never tell her that in this one, brief, ridiculous moment, half submerged in earth, smelling like damp canvas and smoke, you felt closer to another human being than you thought possible in a war. The ward is dim except for the soft amber pools of light from a few shaded lamps. Shadows stretch long between the rows of cots, their outlines softened by blankets, bandages, and the steady rise and fall of sleeping chests. You sit in a chair that's seen better decades, its wooden arm warm from your palm. Beside you, she moves quietly, checking the pulse of the man in the next bed, before returning to where you wait. The air smells faintly of antiseptic, with a thin undercurrent of soap and tea that never seems quite strong enough to mask the sharpness. Somewhere far down the corridor, a nurse's shoes squeak once on the linoleum before the sound fades. The rhythm of this place is its own strange lullaby, the tick of the wall clock, the rustle of sheets, the faint murmur of two medics conferring in low voices. She sits on the edge of the cot, hands folded loosely in her lap, and smiles at you, not the big, confident smile of a first meeting, but the smaller, steadier kind that says she's been here all along. You talk in whispers because the man in the next bed is finally asleep after hours of restlessness, and neither of you wants to break the spell. Historians still argue whether wartime hospital romances were nurtured by the intensity of the setting or doomed by it. Some say the constant proximity to loss made people cling harder to the living. Others argue it was simply human nature, finding connection wherever the world allowed a moment of stillness. You ask her how she manages the night shifts, and she shrugs, saying the darkness makes the hours blur together. And besides, it's easier to sneak extra biscuits from the kitchen after midnight. She tells you, with a conspiratorial grin, that the head nurse pretends not to notice. The quirky truth? In some hospitals, those biscuits were baked from whatever could be scavenged, sometimes even using ground potato peelings to stretch the flour. She hands you a mug, the tea pale and steaming, the kind that tastes better for being shared. Your knees brush as you take it, a tiny point of warmth in the cool air. Somewhere a patient coughs softly, and she glances up with the practiced alertness of someone who can't fully switch off. You notice her hands, one bandaged knuckle, a faint ink stain near her thumb, and nails trimmed close. You imagine the dozens of small tasks they've performed tonight, tying bandages, checking thermometers, holding someone's hand until their breathing slowed. She notices the wear on your sleeves, the faint crease lines from letters folded and refolded in your pocket. The conversation wanders, childhood pets, favorite songs, the best meal you've had since the war started, yours, a proper loaf of bread on leave, hers, an orange a patient's family smuggled in. Outside the ward's small high windows, the night presses in, deep and quiet. You know this moment won't last. Sooner or later she'll have to check the far beds, and you'll be called back to wherever the war needs you. But for now there's the hum of the radiator, the slow rhythm of someone else's breathing, and the soft clink of your mug on the chair's armrest. When you finally stand to leave, she walks you to the door. There's no touch, no lingering glance, just a simple, stay safe, as if it's the most ordinary thing in the world. But as you step into the dim corridor, you realize her voice carries the same warmth as the tea you're still holding in your chest. The blackout blinds are drawn tight, but a sliver of light still sneaks out from the gap at the bottom, brushing across the cobblestones like a whispered secret. You're walking beside her down a quiet street where every window is dimmed, every doorway shadowed, the whole city wrapped in a kind of deliberate hush. Above, the sky is velvet black, broken only by the sweep of a searchlight prowling for danger. Your boots scuff softly against the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a bicycle bell rings twice, quick, purposeful, before fading into the dark. You glance at her, and she's looking straight ahead, her scarf pulled up high against the cold, but you can see the corner of her mouth twitch like she's hiding a smile. Historians still argue whether blackout walks were more about safety or intimacy. On paper, they were a civil defense measure, a way to hide a city from enemy planes. In practice, they became a peculiar kind of date. No bright lights, no prying eyes, just the shared experience of navigating in near darkness. You pass under one of the few lamps still allowed, a faint, hooded glow spilling down in a tight cone. She steps into it for a moment, and you catch a glimpse of her face, soft and amber, before she slips back into shadow. The world feels smaller under blackout rules, like the two of you are the only ones moving through it. A quirky truth? Some people carried tiny flashlights called blackout torches, fitted with special hoods to keep the beam aimed at the ground. Others swore by painted fingernails with luminous polish, just bright enough to be seen when waving a hand. She doesn't have either, so when the street grows darker, she reaches out for your sleeve instead. You guide her along by touch, careful, over the uneven paving stones. Every sound is amplified without the hum of streetlights, the rustle of a stray cat darting into an alley, the distant thud of a door closing, the low murmur of voices from somewhere unseen. There's a strange safety in it, the way the dark seems to press you closer together. When you stop at a corner, she leans against the brick wall, and you stand close enough to feel her breath when she speaks. "Feels like the whole city's holding its breath," she murmurs. You nod, though you're thinking it feels more like the city is giving you this one moment, uninterrupted. A sudden beam of light arcs overhead, a searchlight sweeping across the rooftops before vanishing again. You both watch it without moving, aware that somewhere far above, unseen eyes are scanning for the glow of anything forbidden. But down here, under the hush, there's nothing for them to find. You keep walking until you reach her building, a darkened doorway with a brass knob that catches just enough of the lamplight to glint. She pauses there, hand on the knob, and says quietly, "Thanks for walking me home." The words are simple, but in this blackout world, they feel heavier, like an acknowledgement that safety isn't just about avoiding danger, but about arriving somewhere with someone. You tip your cap and turn back the way you came, your boots soft against the cobblestones. The darkness feels different now, not empty, but charged, carrying the faint echo of her hand on your sleeve and the way her face briefly lit up under the lone street lamp. The hall is noisy enough to make your ears ring, but you barely notice at first because of the way the light catches the silver edge of a dog tag swinging from someone's neck. You're in a crowd where uniforms outnumber civilian clothes, the air thick with cologne, cigarette smoke, and the faint tang of floor polish. Somewhere in the middle of it all, there's a long table lined with small cards, dance cards, and you find yourself watching as she signs her name neatly on the next empty line of someone else's. Historians still argue whether the practice of dance cards in the 1940s was a revival of older traditions or just a quaint leftover from before the war. Either way, they worked the same. A lady could write down the names of her partners for each song, and you'd better believe some men treated that little square of paper like a ticket to heaven. You're standing by the punch table, watching the line shuffle forward when she appears beside you. She has her own card tucked into the strap of her purse, a pencil dangling from it on a bit of string. She smiles, and it's not the polite kind. It's the kind that suggests she already knows you're going to ask. You do, of course, your voice a little rougher than you intended. Save me one? The quirky truth? During the war, some USO halls actually pre-printed dance cards with the names of popular songs or band leaders, just to save time. Yours is blank, which makes the act of filling it in feel oddly personal. She takes your pencil and writes your name in a looping script, then tilts her head toward the bandstand. "Number 4, she says. "Don't be late." You spend the next 3 dances pretending not to watch her, failing miserably. Each time she passes, partnered with someone else, you catch a glimpse of her laughing at something, the movement of her shoulders in time with the music. The band cycles through swing numbers, the floor bending slightly under the weight of so many feet, and you nurse your punch like it's stronger than it is. When song number 4 begins, a slow foxtrot, you're already there, hand out. She takes it without hesitation, and suddenly the room shrinks down to a manageable size. The floor glides under your shoes, the band's horns melt into the warm air, and you realize you haven't stopped grinning since she said yes. She teases you about your timing, about the way you count your steps under your breath. You tell her about your bunkmate, who swears he once danced with a movie star in a hall just like this, but who can't remember her name, only that her perfume smelled like violets. She laughs, leaning in to say she doesn't believe the story, but she likes the image anyway. Around you, other couples weave in and out, some close enough to brush shoulders, others leaving a polite gap between them. The dog tags catch the light again and again, each one swinging in its own rhythm. You imagine yours brushing her arm and think about how something so small can feel like an anchor. When the song ends, she marks her card again, this time adding a little star next to your name. "For luck," she says, slipping it back into her purse. You're tempted to ask for another, but you play it cool, thanking her and stepping back as the next man approaches. You don't dance with her again that night, but you catch her glance across the room more than once. When the evening winds down and the band packs away their instruments, you notice she's left her dance card on the table by the door. Deliberately, you think. You pick it up, fold it carefully, and slide it into your pocket. It's just a bit of paper, creased at the edges, but for now it feels like a promise you're going to keep. The dock is crowded with uniforms and civilian coats, the salty wind whipping through the tangle of luggage, crates, and chatter. You're leaning against a stack of canvas mailbags, trying to look like you have somewhere important to be, when you catch the sound of her laugh, a clear, quick ripple in the noise. She's standing a few yards away with a friend, hair tucked under a hat, eyes darting over the chaos like she's memorizing every detail. You've met her twice before, once in the canteen queue, once at a dance where the music was too loud for more than smiles. This time, you're both here for the same reason, to see someone off. Only in her case, that someone is you. There's a strange, suspended feeling in moments like this, halfway between a beginning and an ending. The gangway looms just beyond the knot of officers, and the air smells of diesel and wet rope. Historians still argue whether wartime partings made relationships stronger or simply cast them in amber, preserving them as they were, but unable to grow. She walks over, her gloved hands clasped in front of her, and you find yourself straightening without meaning to. "You're hard to spot in this crowd," she says, her smile quick but a little tight. You joke that you're the only one here with this exact shade of mud on his boots. She laughs again, but softer this time. The quirky truth? In ports like this, dockside vendors often sold small trinkets, cheap rings, pressed flowers in cellophane, even lockets shaped like anchors, so couples could exchange something tangible before parting. You see a man selling them now, his tray hanging from a strap around his neck. Without thinking too much about it, you buy a tiny silver locket in the shape of a heart. The clasp is stiff, but it opens enough for her to slip in a scrap of paper with her initials. The call comes, final boarding. Around you, the crowd shifts like a tide, everyone moving at once toward their own small goodbyes. You take her hand, feeling the smooth coolness of her glove, and press the locket into her palm. "Hold on to that," you say, "so you don't forget me." She looks at you with an expression you'll replay for months, amused, fond, and just a little sad. "As if I could," she answers. The line moves faster now. You walk backward a few steps, keeping her in sight, until the officer at the gangway gives you the raised eyebrow that says keep moving. You turn, join the others climbing aboard, and feel the deck shift slightly under your boots as you step onto it. When you reach the rail, she's still there, one hand raised, the other closed around the locket. The wind catches her scarf, lifting it for a moment like a signal flag. You raise your arm in return, holding it there until your shoulder aches, and she's just a small figure among many. You don't know if the next time you see her will be on this dock again, or in some other place entirely. But you do know that in a war full of uncertain departures, this one feels like it's carrying more than your duffel bag. Leave comes like a sudden warm breeze in a winter month. You don't question it, you just grab hold before someone changes their mind. You've got 3 days, maybe 4 if the trains run in your favor, and the whole point is to cram an impossible amount of living into hours that will pass too quickly. You step off the train with your duffel slung over one shoulder, scanning the platform until you spot her, standing on tiptoe, searching the crowd, scarf fluttering in the draft from the engine. She sees you and waves, and for a moment the noise of the station blurs into something softer. You cross the space between you and a dozen strides, the smell of coal smoke clinging to your jacket. Historians still argue whether wartime leave strengthened bonds or simply sharpened the ache of separation. Some claim the rush of reunion created a kind of fever, intense, joyful, and exhausting, while others believe the condensed time together left couples clinging to snapshots instead of building something lasting. You can feel the truth of both in the way her hand fits into yours as you leave the station. The quirky truth? Some soldiers would plan every minute of leave down to the half hour, meals, walks, visits, while others refused to plan at all, wanting only to see where the days would carry them. You fall somewhere in between. There's a cafe you've both missed, a park bench under an old elm, and maybe, if the weather holds, a walk along the river. You talk fast, as if trying to use up all the words you've been storing since the last letter. She tells you about the neighbour's new puppy, about the power outage that left half the block cooking dinner by candlelight. You tell her about the long nights, the endless drills, and that one time you and a bunkmate tried to fry spam on a radiator. She laughs, shaking her head, but you can see the shadow behind her smile. That first evening, you walk together until the street lamps flicker on. The city is quieter than it used to be, but the blackout curtains have been pulled back a little now, letting light spill in cautious golden stripes across the pavement. You pause in front of her door longer than necessary, talking about nothing in particular, neither of you wanting to say goodnight. The next day is warmer, sunlight slanting through the cafe window onto the chipped saucers and mismatched cups. You sit close enough to feel her knee brush yours under the table, the kind of small contact that feels enormous when you've been starved for it. She asks if you're eating enough, and you lie badly, but she lets you get away with it. By the third day, the hours feel like they're running downhill. You walk by the river, boots crunching on the gravel path, watching ducks leave ripples that stretch far beyond where they swim. She tucks her arm through yours, and for a while neither of you speaks. The quiet feels like a gift, something the war can't ration. When the time comes to head back to the station, the air between you tightens. You don't talk about when you'll see each other again, because the truth is, you don't know. At the platform, the train huffs impatiently, the whistle sharp and final. You kiss her cheek, then her forehead, and she holds your sleeve for an extra heartbeat before letting go. From the carriage window, you watch her step back, her hand raised in a small wave. You keep your eyes on her until the platform curves away and she's gone. The seat feels colder without her beside you, but in your pocket is a folded napkin from the cafe, her handwriting scrawled across it. Come back in one piece. The air in the shelter is close, heavy with the scent of damp concrete and too many people breathing the same rationed oxygen. You've wedged yourself onto a bench, barely wide enough for two, knees pressed against hers in the narrow space. Overhead, the muffled thud of distant blasts travels down through the earth, shaking a fine sprinkle of dust from the ceiling. It settles on your sleeves, turning the olive drab a shade paler. The single bulb strung along the center of the shelter swings slightly with each tremor, making shadows lurch across the walls. People speak in low voices, not because anyone's asleep, but because loudness feels wrong down here. You glance at her, and she's looking at the floor, thumb tracing the edge of a folded handkerchief in her lap. Historians still argue whether these shared moments underground brought people closer or simply magnified what was already there. Some say the proximity stripped away the polite layers, leaving only the truth of whether you could stand, or even crave, each other's company in the dark. She catches you watching and offers a faint smile. "Dust in your hair," she says, reaching up to brush it away. The touch is quick, but it leaves a warm echo in its wake. A child nearby lets out a quiet giggle, and his mother hushes him, though her voice is more habit than irritation. The quirky truth? Many shelters kept tins of barley sweets or boiled candies on hand, partly for children and partly because sugar, even in tiny doses, was a comfort when the walls rattled. She has one now, unwrapping it with slow fingers before offering you half. You take it, the shard sticky on your palm, and let it dissolve on your tongue. The taste is faintly medicinal, but you swear it helps you breathe easier. Above, another boom rolls through, this one closer, and the light sways wider. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else hums softly, a tune you think you've heard before but can't quite name. She shifts her weight closer, shoulder against yours now, and you realize she's not flinching with the blasts anymore. Maybe neither of you is. The conversation drifts into the kind of territory people avoid on the surface. What you'll do when it's all over, where you'd live if you could choose anywhere. She says she'd like a place with a garden, even if it's just big enough for a single rose bush. You tell her about the stretch of coastline you grew up near, where the gulls cry so loud they wake you before the sun. She laughs at that, a quiet laugh, but the sound seems to settle the dust in the air. When the all-clear finally sounds, it's almost a disappointment. The crowd stirs, gathering bags and children, but no one rushes. The surface feels far away and unreal after hours underground. You stand, stretch stiff legs, and glance at her. She meets your gaze with a look you can't quite decipher, but you're sure it means something you'll remember. As you climb the narrow steps back into the night, you notice she's still walking close enough that your sleeves brush. The stars above look impossibly bright after the dim shelter, but you don't comment. Some moments are better kept between the dust and the dark. The chaplain's quarters smell faintly of pipe tobacco and candle wax, a combination that clings to the air like an old hymn. You've stopped by under the pretense of returning a borrowed book, though the real reason is sitting cross-legged on the floor by the small desk, sleeves rolled up, grinning over a contraband stash of chocolate bars. She tilts her head toward you, one hand still on the paper wrapper. "Don't just stand there. Help me hide these before he comes back." Her voice is hushed, but there's a spark in it, the sort of mischief that's best when rules are close enough to hear. Historians still argue whether wartime romances in places like this, chapels, aid stations, officer lounges, were born from the borrowed privacy or in spite of it. Whatever the truth, moments like this felt stolen in the best possible way. You kneel beside her, the wooden floor cool through your trousers. The chocolate smells sweeter than it has any right to, considering how long it's probably been hoarded. The quirky truth? During the war, chaplains were sometimes given small shipments of candy to distribute as morale boosters, especially after hard weeks. It was meant for everyone, of course, but sometimes distribution took a scenic route. She breaks a square in half, pressing the larger piece into your palm. "For the journey back to your post," she says, though you're only a short walk away. The chocolate melts almost instantly against your fingers, and you have to lick the edge before it stains your cuff. She laughs at that, and the sound bounces softly off the chapel walls. A shadow flickers in the doorway, but it's only the wind moving the curtain. You both pause anyway, hands suspended mid-movement, like you've been caught in something far more illicit than sweets. Then she shakes her head, muttering, "You'd think we were smuggling gold." In a way, you are. Sugar is rarer than silver these days, and the act of sharing it feels just as valuable. You sit there a little longer than necessary, the quiet around you punctuated by the faint ticking of the chaplain's clock. She talks about the first chocolate she ever had as a child, how it came in a shiny tin, and she kept the box long after the last bite was gone. You tell her about the time you tried to trade 2 ration biscuits for a candy bar, only to discover it was filled with raisins. She wrinkles her nose and says that's a crime. When you finally stand, she slips the remaining bar into the inside pocket of your jacket. "For later," she says, but the way her hand lingers makes you think she means more than just the candy. Outside, the evening air is cooler, scented faintly with wood smoke from the mess hall. You start back toward your post, the weight of the chocolate warm against your chest. In a few hours, you'll unwrap it again, maybe share it with a friend or maybe not. Either way, it'll taste like more than sugar. It'll taste like the quiet in that room, the shared glance over a split square, and the way her fingers brushed yours without apology. The moon is high, a pale coin hanging above the sandbagged buildings, casting long shadows that stretch across the quiet street. You walk beside her at an unhurried pace, the sound of your boots muffled by the dust. Somewhere far off, a radio plays a scratchy waltz, so faint it could be imagined. The night smells faintly of gun oil and distant sea air, a combination you've learned to recognize as the scent of this particular outpost. She carries her cap in one hand, the other swinging loosely at her side, until it brushes yours by accident, or maybe on purpose. You're not sure, and you don't ask. Historians still argue whether moonlit walks in wartime were acts of rebellion or of necessity. Some say soldiers sought them out simply because the light made navigation easier when blackout rules dimmed the streets. Others insist there was something romantic in it, an unspoken agreement that if the moon was generous enough to shine, you should meet it halfway. You pass a row of buildings with their windows braced by planks, each one casting odd, angular shadows. The quirky truth? Sandbags weren't just for protection from blasts. In some places, they doubled as makeshift benches. She stops at one now, perching on it with her knees pulled together, motioning for you to join her. From here, the shadows look even longer, stretching toward you like the city itself is leaning in to listen. You talk about ordinary things, what you'd eat, if you could have anything right now, which songs you'd request, if the radio actually took calls from this far out. She says she misses fresh bread, so much she dreams about it. And you counter with the image of an apple pie the size of a truck wheel. Every so often, you both glance at the moon, as if checking it hasn't slipped away while you weren't looking. The light falls soft on her face, turning the curve of her cheek into something you think you might remember for the rest of your life. She shifts closer, enough that your shoulders touch. The warmth is subtle but undeniable, like the slow bloom of heat from a campfire you've just sat beside. You don't move away, neither does she. When the clock tower in the square chimes softly, only 3 notes, the rest long gone silent, you know it's time to start back. You stand, brushing the sand from your trousers, and she falls into step beside you. At her door, she pauses, cap in hand. "Safe walk back," she says, a phrase you've both used before, but which feels heavier tonight. You nod, watching as she disappears inside, the door closing without a sound. The street is empty now, the moon still bright. As you turn toward your own quarters, you realize that in a war full of sharp noises and harsher days, it's the quiet moments like this, soft shadows, moonlight, and the faint brush of a shoulder that carve the deepest marks. You're stretched out on your bunk, the barracks dim except for a small desk lamp left on near the corner. The rest of the men are scattered, some reading, some writing letters, a few already asleep with their arms thrown over their faces. You've got the radio propped on a crate by your feet, the antenna angled just so, coaxing a signal from somewhere miles away. The voice comes through in a wash of static, low, warm, carrying the slow rhythm of a love song you've never heard before. The singer's words rise and fall like they're trying not to wake the rest of the world. You close your eyes and imagine the band in some far-off studio, every horn polished, every bow tightened, the air smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and floor wax. She's sitting across from you in your mind, elbows on the table, chin resting in her palms, listening to the same song at the same time. You picture her kitchen light spilling onto the floor, her radio balanced on the windowsill, the same voice threading its way between you. Historians still argue whether wartime radio broadcasts created real intimacy or just the illusion of it. They say soldiers clung to those voices not because they belonged to loved ones, but because they felt like home in a world where home was always out of reach. The quirky truth? Some radio stations would take dedications from soldiers and air them late at night, hoping their words would find their way back to the right ears. You've thought about sending one, but you're not sure you trust the airwaves with something that fragile. You turn the volume up a fraction, enough to catch the soft brush of a snare drum under the melody. The barracks noise fades, the rustle of paper, the muffled cough from the next bunk, the creak of someone shifting under a blanket. For a few minutes, the only thing that exists is the song and the space it fills. When it ends, the announcer's voice slides in, calm and precise, talking about the next number, like it's just another track on a playlist instead of a lifeline. You let the static wash over you, the music seeping into the walls. Later, when you write your next letter, you'll mention the song, just in case she caught it too. You won't say you imagined her there beside you, swaying slightly in her chair, humming along without realizing it. Some things are better left between the lines. The rain has just stopped, leaving the air damp and cool, the ground soft enough to hold a fresh footprint. You're leaning against a low wall near the edge of the parade ground, the smell of wet earth and machine oil mixing in the breeze. In your hand, you've got something small and gleaming, a regimental pin polished on your sleeve until it catches the fading light. She's there in front of you, hair tucked back, a curious smile on her face. "What's that for?" she asks, tilting her head toward your hand. You turn the pin between your fingers, the metal warm from your touch. "A trade," you say, though the truth is you're not sure what you expect in return. Historians still argue whether giving away insignia like this was romantic or simply a wartime quirk. Some say it was a soldier's way of making a promise without using words. Others call it a gesture, no different from swapping ration cards. But you've seen enough to know that in the right hands, a pin could carry the weight of a ring. The quirky truth? In some places, soldiers would bend pins into makeshift rings using nothing but pliers and stubbornness, wearing them as stand-ins until real gold was possible. You don't have pliers tonight, and you're not bending this one. It feels too much like a piece of your skin. She hesitates before taking it, running her thumb along the engraved edge. "I can't wear this," she says softly. "They'll think I'm claiming something." You shrug, leaning a little closer. Maybe you are. The look she gives you is half amusement, half warning, but she slips the pin into her coat pocket anyway. There's a pause, the kind where words would just get in the way. Somewhere behind you, a bugle sounds in the distance, calling the end of the day. When you finally start walking back toward the buildings, she matches your pace. Neither of you says much. There's nothing urgent to add. But as you part ways at the corner, she taps her coat pocket lightly, just enough for you to see, and mouths the word, safe. You head inside with rain still clinging to your boots, feeling oddly lighter. The pin is gone, but the space it leaves behind feels filled with something else entirely. The envelope is thin and pale, its edges worn soft from being handled too many times on the way here. You're sitting on the edge of your bunk, boots still laced, holding it like it might vanish if you're careless. The return address is familiar enough to make your stomach tighten before you even open it. You slide a thumb under the flap and unfold the single sheet inside. The handwriting is unmistakable, slightly slanted, the ink occasionally darker where the pen lingered too long. And then there's the thing you weren't expecting. A faint scent rising from the paper, so subtle you might have missed it if you hadn't lifted it closer. Soap and lavender. Historians still argue whether scenting letters was deliberate or just the side effect of living in close quarters with whatever soaps, lotions, or flowers were on hand. Either way, in a war where everything smells faintly of oil canvas and mud, a trace of lavender feels like an intrusion from another world. The quirky truth. Some soldiers swore they could tell the difference between letters that had been scented on purpose and ones that had picked it up accidentally, claiming the deliberate ones always lingered longer. You can't say for sure, but you'd like to believe this one was intentional. The words themselves aren't dramatic. She writes about her week, how the baker finally managed to get a shipment of flour, how the rain flooded the alley behind her building, how she found a photograph of her parents tucked into an old book. But between the lines you catch the unspoken things. The way she says, I hope you're warm instead of I miss you, or I'm glad you're keeping busy instead of I'm worried. You read it twice, then a third time, slower, letting the sentences settle. The lavender seems stronger now, though you know it's just your mind pulling it forward. You fold the paper carefully, pressing the creases along the same lines they arrived with, and slip it back into the envelope. Before you tuck it away, you pull out the small tin box you keep under your bunk. Inside are a handful of other letters, each one a little more worn, each one holding some fragment of home. You place this one on top, close the lid, and rest your hand on it for a moment. Later, when the lights are out and the barracks has settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, you'll take it out again. Not to read, just to hold, breathing in the faint, stubborn trace of lavender until the war feels far enough away to let you drift off. The city is quiet except for the crunch of your boots over broken stone. Rubble piles lean against the shells of buildings, their jagged edges catching what little light slips through the clouds. Somewhere, a shutter creaks in the wind, the sound oddly gentle, in a place that's been anything but. She's walking beside you, her steps careful, on the uneven ground. You both avoid looking too long at the gaps where walls used to be. It's not avoidance so much as a kind of mercy. Your eyes need something living to rest on, and today that's each other. Historians still argue whether love found in ruined cities was born from the shared act of survival or from defiance, a refusal to let destruction be the only story written in those streets. You're leaning toward defiance now, if only because of the small, stubborn flower you spot growing between two bricks. You stop to point it out, and she kneels, brushing her fingers lightly over its petals. Wild, she says, her voice so quiet it barely rises over the wind. You nod, and the moment hangs there, delicate but certain. The quirky truth? In some bombed-out towns, locals would plant quick-growing flowers or herbs in craters and rubble gaps, not just for beauty, but as a quiet statement. Life will have the last word. You wonder if this one was planted on purpose or if it simply refused to die. You walk on, passing doorways that lead nowhere, stairs ending abruptly in the open air. The sound of your footsteps changes with the terrain, hollow where the ground hides a basement below, sharp on patches of surviving tile. Every so often, you catch the faint scent of smoke still clinging to the walls. She tells you she remembers this street from before, how there was a bakery halfway down, how the window used to steam up in winter. You ask her what it sold, and she closes her eyes for a second as if tasting it. "Sweet rolls," she says, "with just enough cinnamon." You reach the end of the street, where the ruins give way to a patch of open ground. Someone's set up a small table here, selling tea from a dented kettle and biscuits that crumble into dust at the first bite. You each take a cup, the tea, bitter but warm, and sit on the edge of a low wall that's somehow still standing. For a while, you drink in silence, the steam curling upward and disappearing into the grey. You know the city will keep changing, bricks cleared away, new walls built. But the memory of walking here with her, of finding that single wildflower, will stay sharp. When you finish your tea, she sets her cup down beside yours and threads her arm through yours as you stand. The path back is no smoother, but it feels shorter now, as if the ruins have given you their quiet blessing to pass through. The beach is pale silver under the dawn light, the tide rolling in with the slow, steady breath of something ancient and indifferent to the war. You stand with your boots just above the wet line, watching the foam creep forward, curl around a pebble, and retreat again. She's beside you, her coat buttoned high, scarf tucked in tight against the wind. The air smells of salt and cold iron, sharp enough to make your eyes water. You've both been quiet for most of the walk here, maybe because words would only draw attention to the clock ticking down in your heads. Historians still argue whether moments like this were about goodbye or about pretending goodbye didn't exist. Some say couples sought out the sea because its vastness made their own problems feel smaller. Others believe it was because the horizon looked like a promise, even if it wasn't. The quirky truth? Soldiers often carried small shells in their pockets after such walks, believing they'd bring luck, or at least a reminder of a calmer place. Some even sent them home in envelopes wrapped in scraps of paper so they wouldn't shatter on the journey. You crouched to pick up one now, a small, ridged shell the colour of old ivory. You turn it over in your hand, tracing the grooves with your thumb, before holding it out to her. She takes it without a word, slipping it into her coat pocket like she's been keeping a space ready for it. The wind picks up, ruffling the edge of her scarf, and you resist the urge to smooth it down. Instead, you tell her about the time you fell asleep on a beach as a boy and woke up with a crab pinching your ear. She laughs, the sound cutting clean through the cold, and you file it away for later, something to replay when the silence of barracks nights grows too thick. You both watch the sun climb higher, the light turning the waves from steel grey to something closer to gold. In another hour, you'll have to turn back. The orders are waiting, the transport already being loaded, but right now the ocean feels endless, and the minutes stretch wider than they should. She slips her hand into yours, the grip firm against the wind. You don't say anything, you just stand there together, letting the tide come in and out, as if it might carry your parting out to sea, and keep it there. When you finally start walking back along the damp sand, your footprints trail behind you in two parallel lines. You know the next tide will wash them away, but for now they're proof that for this morning at least you were both here. You carry it in the breast pocket of your jacket, tucked behind the top button so it doesn't bend. The photograph is no larger than a playing card, its corners rounded and worn smooth from your thumb, tracing the edges over and over. She's in it, of course, smiling just enough to make you wonder what she'd been thinking when it was taken. The print is already starting to fade, the black softening to greys. In the background, there's a tree leaning slightly to one side, a patch of sky pale enough that the clouds barely show. You know the image by heart, but still you study it, as though some hidden detail might reveal itself if you stare long enough. Historians still argue whether carrying photographs into war was purely sentimental or served a deeper purpose, an anchor, a talisman, a reminder of what you were fighting to return to. Some soldiers swore the photos kept them sane. Others admitted they sometimes made the homesickness worse. The quirky truth? In damp or wet conditions, men would often slip photographs into wax paper or even coat them lightly in clear nail polish to protect the image from smudges and sweat. Yours isn't coated, but the creases suggest it survived more than one close call. On long nights in the barracks, you've caught yourself pulling it out when no one's looking, the dim light of a single bulb casting her face in sepia shadows. Sometimes you talk to it under your breath, not full conversations, just small updates, the kind of things you'd tell her if she was sitting across the table with a cup of tea between you. Out in the field, the photo sits closer to your heart than the maps in your satchel. You've felt it there during marches, during the sharp stillness before dawn, during moments when the silence feels heavier than the noise. Once you even pressed your hand to it like a shield, though you'd never admit that to anyone. Tonight, you unfold your blanket, settle back, and take the picture out again. The lamplight makes the paper gleam faintly, and for a few seconds, the barracks around you vanish. It's just her, leaning toward the camera, caught in a moment that stayed alive long after it passed. You slide it back into your pocket, the edge settling into its usual spot over your heart. Tomorrow, you'll carry it again, and the day after that. As long as the paper holds together, she'll walk with you. The station smells of coal smoke and damp wool, the air heavy with the kind of waiting that feels like it might never end. You stand on the platform with your kit bag at your feet, the whistle already blown for boarding, but you don't step forward yet. She's there beside you, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if holding them together might keep the moment from breaking apart. The train looms just beyond, steam curling around its wheels like restless ghosts. Every hiss and clank feels louder than it should, as if the machine itself knows it's about to pull you away. You look at her and try to memorize every detail, the tilt of her hat, the way her scarf bunches at one shoulder, the faint crease between her brows that wasn't there the last time you saw her. Historians still argue whether train station goodbyes in wartime were cathartic or cruel, whether the ritual of a long farewell helped soften the blow or simply dragged it out until it cut deeper. You can feel the truth of both pressing on your chest right now. The quirky truth? During the war, some people swore by short goodbyes, believing that lingering on the platform tempted fate. Others insisted on staying until the train physically pulled away, as though leaving first might look like surrender. You fall into the second camp, unwilling to give up a single second you've been given. When the conductor shouts the final call, you take her hands in yours. They're warm despite the chill in the air. "I'll write," you say, though you both know the words are too small to carry the weight they need to. She nods, biting her lip, her eyes darting to the train as if it might leave without you. And she wouldn't mind if it did. The moment fractures when the crowd begins to move, the shuffle of boots and shoes pulling you toward the carriage steps. You hold her gaze until the last possible moment, then climb aboard, turning to the nearest window as you find your seat. Through the steam, you see her raise her hand in a slow wave. You press your palm to the glass in answer, though the cold pain steals the warmth from it almost instantly. The train lurches forward, the platform sliding past in pieces, her face, the bench where you sat last time, the station clock marking the moment you leave her behind again. You keep looking until she's nothing more than a small figure in the distance, still standing there, still waving. Only when the curve of the track hides her completely do you lean back in your seat, the image of her fixed behind your eyelids like a photograph you'll never need to develop. You raise a dented tin cup and try not to make a face before you've even tasted the stuff. Calling it wine is generous. It's closer to a stern lecture delivered by a grape's distant cousin. Still, the cup is warm in your palm from the stew pot it lived in earlier, and everyone around you wears the same expectant expression, half celebration, half dare. "À la victoire," someone declares, mangling the accent with cheerful determination. You add your cup to the small chorus of clinks. The sound is thin but clear, like a small bell rung for a private ceremony. You take a sip. It's sour, a little metallic, from the cup, with a whisper of fruit if you squint your taste buds. Somehow, it's also wonderful. Historians still argue whether wartime toasts like these were ritual morale boosters, sanctioned by officers, or improvised moments of rebellion against the daily grey. Either way, the effect is immediate. Shoulders loosen, jokes sharpen, and the dim room brightens by a few unmeasured watts. The quirky truth? In more than one theatre, ration wine wasn't wine at all, but a concoction brewed from raisins, sugar scraps, and optimism, sometimes fermented in canteens or mess tins hidden behind potato sacks. You eye your cup with new respect, imagining its chaotic origin story. No wonder it tastes like a folk song. You're crowded into a corner of the mess with a half-circle of familiar faces. The chaplain's clock has just clicked past some indecent hour. Someone wedges a wooden crate into service as a table and spills a deck of dog-eared cards across it. On the wall, a hand-painted sign left over from dance night reads, "No jitter-bugging." The bass player isn't here, but the sign still wobbles when laughter bumps the makeshift table. A callback from another room in your life, still funny in this one. She's there too, perched on an upturned bucket, knees tucked close, a lock of hair escaped from its pins. You hand her a cup and apologize in advance for the contents. "If this knocks us flat," you say, "tell the coroner to write overwhelmed by vintage." She smothers a smile and raises her cup. "To vintage," she says, and taps yours. The clink sounds like a promise being notarized. The first sip is a wince, the second is an adjustment, the third is surprisingly companionable. Around you, the mess hums. Someone tells a story about a cousin who brewed something similar in peacetime and used it to strip paint. Someone else swears ration wine makes the best marinade for spam, a culinary claim so bold it borders on treason. You contribute a tale about the chaplain's chocolate stash and the way shared sweetness can turn a room holy, even if the altar is a desk and the choir sings with sticky fingers. The memory tastes richer than your cup ever could. On the crate table, the cards shuffle, cut, and deal themselves into little dramas. You don't sit. You hover near her instead, cups balanced on a strip of plank like a miniature bar. She tells you about a letter from home, scented, unintentionally, she insists, with lavender soap. You counter with the shell you pocketed from the dawn beach, still ridged and pale in your mind. Between the two of you, a small museum of gentle contraband accumulates, scents, shells, songs caught late at night on a wavering radio. She nods toward your breast pocket. Still carrying it? You pat the photograph by reflex, feeling the softened corner. "Closest thing I have to a compass," you say. "It points me toward better decisions." She lifts an eyebrow. "Does it also point you away from third helpings of stew?" "It's a compass, not a miracle," you reply. Joke one lands. Her laugh skims the rim of her cup. A corporal staggers past with a kettle that sloshes too eagerly. "Top-offs?" he asks, already pouring. You lift your cup and accept fate. The second measure tastes marginally friendlier, as if it's learned your name. You catch yourself thinking the word home, not as a place but as a temperature, somewhere the air fits your lungs on the first try. A practical voice from the back proposes a toast to the letters we haven't written yet. And that gets you because it's true, because tomorrow's paper already waits with its thin lines and compliant margins. You picture your pencil, its chewed eraser, the tiny cartoons that will shrink into invisibility on V-mail. You've learned that what can't be said straight can sometimes be drawn sideways. You make a mental note to sketch a tin cup with a heroic cape, a private near the radio fiddles until music crawls through the static. A slow number, the singer's voice tasting of smoke and resilience. You and she shift closer without comment. "Remember the dance hall?" you murmur. "Remember the chalk dust cuffs?" she answers. The sign on the wall wobbles again like it's eavesdropping. For a moment, the mess becomes a ball with bad lighting, the crate a bandstand, tin cups masquerading as crystal. If love is a battlefield, as you once muttered to yourself, tonight the medals are for grace under fermentation. Joke 2 sidles in, and even you have to grin at your own nonsense. Across the room, someone lifts his cup and recites a list of tiny victories: dry socks found at the bottom of a trunk, a can of peaches liberated from the labyrinth of supply, a postcard that arrived on the same month it was sent. When he finishes, you add your own: a moonlit walk where shadows behaved, a foxhole cigarette that felt like a treaty, a canteen queue where the ladle was generous and the smile behind it more so. The recitation steadies everyone the way a metronome steadies a piano. She taps the rim of your cup, drawing your focus back. When it's over, she says, casual like a pebble tossed into a pond, we're planting a rose bush. The shelter's dust returns to you, the handkerchief, the barley sweet split in two. Front yard, you say, where the sun can find it first. And a bench, she adds, just big enough for two and a thermos. We'll paint no jitterbugging over it, you tease. Absolutely not, she counters. We'll break every posted rule. The future arrives briefly, puts its feet up, and finishes your drink. The radio croons a final chorus. The corporal reappears with the kettle and a warning. Last round. Tomorrow's dawn is punctual. You look into your cup's shallow tide, the liquid reflecting a small, wobbly you. To later, you say. To later, she echoes, and the clink is quieter this time, a secret handshake between the present and what you're building just beyond it. Mainstream fact for the ledger you keep in your head: official rations rarely included actual wine, but Allied troops did sometimes receive small alcohol allotments, beer or spirits, especially after engagements or on holidays. Meanwhile, civilians in occupied or embattled cities turned to home brews and ersatz recipes, making a ritual of scarcity itself. You file that beside the other truths you're collecting, the ones that sound like footnotes but feel like headlines when lived. Another truth, the odd kind that sticks. Some units fashioned rings from aircraft aluminum or brass shell casings, polishing them with toothpaste until they shone, then toasting with whatever passed for wine as if the metal itself had agreed to bless the promise. You picture your regimental pin, the one that now lives in her coat pocket, catching lamplight as a miniature moon. By the time the kettle runs dry, cheeks have warmed and the mess has settled into a softer volume. Cards are stacked. The crate returns to being a crate. Someone yawns with the sincerity of a man negotiating peace with sleep. Duty has a way of clearing its throat politely and being obeyed. You and she rinse the cups at a tap that wheezes like an old accordion. Cold water bites your fingers, and you both hiss through your teeth, laughing at the synchrony. Outside, the night smells of damp rope and a hint of the sea, like a memory sneaking out after curfew. You walk her to the barracks door, a path you could trace blindfolded now. At the step, she tugs your sleeve and leans in, not for a kiss, but for a steady look that travels all the way through you and takes up residence in your ribcage. Same time tomorrow? She asks. There won't be wine, you say. There'll be us, she counters, which is difficult to argue with when your heartbeat is auditioning for a drum line. Joke 3 threatens to arrive. You nearly say, as long as the coroner approves, but you swallow it back, letting the quiet have the last word. Later, in the dim of your bunk, you write by the glow of a confiscated blackout torch pointed into your blanket like a tiny sun. You describe the toast without naming names, the radio without citing songs, the future bench without showing its address. You sketch a tin cup with a cape after all, and beside it a rosebush, leaves shaped like little hearts, wearing dog tags. You seal the letter, press the flap, and breathe on it as if the warmth could make the promise set faster. Before you sleep, you tap the photo in your pocket and think of the shell in her coat, the lavender in your tin of letters, the chocolate's melted fingerprint inside your jacket. You decide that scarcity has a strange alchemy. It turns tin into silver, soup into ceremony, and ration wine, against the odds, into a sacrament that tastes briefly like hope. You're sitting at a small cafe table in the market square, the kind that wobbles slightly no matter how you arrange the legs. The air is filled with a hum of voices, most of them speaking in a language you only half understand. She's across from you, leaning forward, a notebook between you both. You've decided to teach each other your languages, well, pieces of them. She points to an apple on the table and says the word in her tongue, slow and careful. You repeat it, mangling the vowel enough to make her laugh. You counter by pointing to your cup of coffee and giving her the English word. She repeats it almost perfectly, then raises an eyebrow as if to say, your turn again. Historians still argue whether these cross-language courtships were acts of romance or necessity. Some say they bridged worlds in a way nothing else could. Others believe they were simply practical. Two people learning to barter in each other's comfort zones. You can feel a bit of both here, each word an offering, each mispronunciation a shared joke. The quirky truth? In some occupied cities, soldiers and locals carried pocket-sized phrase books issued by the military. The books covered essentials like, where is the station, but also included oddly specific phrases such as the tailor will mend your trousers and this wine is too sour. You imagine tucking one into your pocket, but right now you prefer her version. Handwritten translations in the margins of a page you both keep smudging with your fingertips. You sketch small pictures to match the words, an umbrella, a loaf of bread, a bicycle, and she adds the translations beside them. Sometimes she draws instead, her pen lines quick and sure, while you supply the English. When you get a word wrong, she taps the notebook with the pen and says it again, slower, until you're close enough that she nods in approval. Around you, the market continues its steady rhythm, the clink of bottles being unloaded from a cart, the call of a vendor selling roasted chestnuts, the sudden laughter of two women haggling over scarves. The square smells of fresh bread and damp cobblestones, a mixture that feels like it belongs to this exact corner of the world. When your coffee is gone, she slides the notebook across the table. You open it to see she's written one last word for you, the letters small and neat. You ask what it means, and she says, "It's not for the phrase book, just for you." You close the notebook gently and hand it back, resisting the urge to press the question. Some words are better saved for later, maybe even for after the war. For now, the important thing is the sound of her voice when she says them, the way the syllables seem to hold more than one meaning. As you stand to leave, she loops her arm through yours, and you realize you've spent the whole afternoon speaking in a language that belongs to neither of you, but somehow feels like home. You find it almost by accident, a patch of green tucked behind the supply sheds, half hidden by a leaning fence. The boards have a gap just wide enough to squeeze through, and on the other side, the noise of the camp dulls into something softer. It's not much. A narrow strip of grass, a few stubborn bushes, and one gnarled apple tree that looks older than the war itself. But compared to the dust and diesel outside, it feels like a secret country. She's already there when you arrive, sitting cross-legged in the shade, her back against the tree's rough bark. She looks up, and the faintest grin tugs at her mouth like she's been expecting you. Historians still argue whether soldiers in wartime sought out quiet places because they craved solitude or because they were looking for someone to share it with. This feels like the latter. You step into the grass, your boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, and for a moment you don't say anything at all. The quirky truth? Some bases actually had unofficial gardens kept alive by soldiers or locals, planted in whatever soil they could find. These hidden spaces grew carrots in old ammo tins, daisies in ration cans, and once, according to a story you half believe, a single tomato plant in a teapot. You spot something similar here, a rusted tin pail sprouting a clump of violets, their petals bright against the grey metal. She pats the grass beside her, and you sit, leaning back until your shoulder brushes hers. The air smells faintly of earth and leaves, layered over with the distant scent of cooking from the mess. Overhead, the branches sway, filtering the sunlight into shifting coins of gold on your sleeves. You talk about nothing urgent, whether the tree might still bear fruit, if violets survive better in tin than in the ground, how the fence's gap must have been made by someone with a good reason to keep coming back. The conversation wanders, slow and comfortable, like the shade itself. After a while, she pulls something from her pocket, a biscuit wrapped in wax paper, and breaks it in half. You take your share, chewing in companionable silence. It's dry, but here it might as well be cake. The rest of the world feels far away, though you can still hear the occasional echo of a shouted order or the clank of metal on metal. You both ignore it, pretending the garden is its own island, immune to the war's geography. When it's time to go, you don't need to speak about meeting here again. The fence will still have its gap, the violets will still bloom in their pail, and the apple tree will keep throwing its shade for anyone who knows where to look. You slip back through the boards, the camp noise swelling to meet you, but the quiet you've just left clings like the faint scent of violets on your jacket. The rain has been falling all afternoon, a steady drizzle that leaves the cobblestones slick and shining like dark glass. You should both be indoors, but she's tugged you out into it, laughing at your protests and ignoring the fact that your boots are already soaked through. By the time you reach the square, the puddles have joined into shallow lakes, reflecting the glow from the few street lamps still lit under blackout regulations. She stops in the middle of one and looks back over her shoulder, hair plastered to her forehead, the grin on her face as defiant as it is inviting. Historians still argue whether dancing in the rain is an act of foolishness or freedom. In wartime, it feels like both, thumbing your nose at the cold and the damp, insisting that joy gets its turn no matter the circumstances. The quirky truth? Some soldiers swore that rain-damp streets made for the best waltzing surfaces, just slick enough for the turns to glide, but with enough grit to keep from slipping. You're testing that theory now as she steps into your arms without hesitation. The music is imaginary, pulled from memory, a scratchy waltz from the radio, the hum of a gramophone in a corner of some long-gone dance hall. You count under your breath at first, but she cuts you off with a quiet, "Just feel it." And so you do, following the rhythm of her movements, the soft slap of your boots in the water, the rain's percussion on your shoulders. She tilts her face up, eyes half closed against the drops, and for a moment, the rest of the world vanishes. There's only the two of you, the silvered puddles and the cool air that smells of wet stone and distant wood smoke. When you finally stop, both of you, breathless, her coat is soaked through and your hands are chilled from where they held hers. You don't mind. You'll remember this more for the warmth in your chest than the cold on your skin. You walk back slowly, your wet boots squelching with each step, sharing the kind of silence that feels earned. At her door, she wrings the water from her hair and says, "Next time, we'll find real music." You nod, but you're already certain that nothing with four walls and a roof could match the dance you just had. You start with a circle that isn't a circle yet, just a scrap of metal, bright as moonlight, shaved from the edge of an aircraft panel that retired earlier than anyone planned. You found it in the repair shed after a long shift, a thin crescent that caught your eye, the way shiny things catch magpies. It feels light in your palm, warmer than you expect once your thumb has worried it for a minute. The plan arrives the way most wartime plans arrive. Half memory, half rumor, and a generous portion of confidence you have no right to. You've heard men talk about making rings from shell casings, about coins tapped round and round the neck of a bottle until they softened into a circle. You've seen a medic wearing a band carved from perspex, clear, ghostly, cut from a shattered canopy and polished with toothpaste until it glowed like a drop of rain. Historians still argue whether trench art like this, rings, brooches, letter openers, was a form of therapy or just the inevitable souvenir-making of bored hands. The mainstream fact is simple enough. By the 1940s, soldiers and aircrew were turning scrap brass and aircraft aluminum into keepsakes all over the world, sometimes on leave, sometimes between alarms, sometimes in hospital wards where time needed taming. You consider both views while holding the metal to the light. Maybe it's therapy when your hands are quiet and souvenir when your heart needs proof. Maybe it's both. You raid the tool bench like a polite thief, a file, a stubby drill bit, a length of dowel that looks like it could double as a rolling pin in a very small kitchen. You pocket a stub of candle too because you've seen someone warm a coin before working it, as if rituals had physics. The shed smells of oil and cut wood, a scent that always makes you think of competence. You could use some of that tonight. Back at your bunk, you make a workstation of a ration box. You measure your own finger with a loop of string, scientific, then try to guess hers, reckless. The string sits on your palm like a question mark. Ring size, you mutter, brought to you by the University of Improvisation. Joke 1 lands quietly in the half-lit room. A bunkmate grunts, rolls over, and resumes his campaign against the concept of blankets. You press the strip of aluminum against the dowel and begin to coax it around, not too hard, just enough to persuade the metal that circles are friendlier than lines. It resists at first, then yields by slow degrees, a soft, surprising bend like a shrug. You file the edges, tiny comet tails falling onto the box top. When sparks don't fly, you count it as engineering. The filing takes you back to the secret garden behind the barracks fence, to violets in a rusted pail, and the way she broke a biscuit in half without ceremony. You think of that apple tree's bark against your shoulders, of her head leaning just close enough for your breath to notice. A ring for that feeling. Quiet, sturdy, stubborn against the weather. You pause to rub the forming band against a corner, dipped with toothpaste, an old trick that polishes aluminum like magic. The air fills with mint and a faint, metallic sweetness. You picture the chaplain's quarters and the smuggled chocolate. How a square of sugar turned the room into a holiday. You imagine a blessing for this ring, not from a prayer book, but from a shared laugh and the shadow of his pipe smoke curling like incense. The ring looks almost right, circular if you don't squint. You test it on your smallest finger and pretend that means something scientific. You could leave it rough for charm, or you could chase perfection until sunrise. You choose the middle path, smoothing just enough that it won't snag a glove or a sleeve. You want the inside to carry words, so you take the point of a needle and scratch a line at a time, slow, careful, the way you'd write on V-mail when every letter had to count. Initials first, hers, then yours, because you're old-fashioned like that in a world that insists on modernity. On the outside, you add a tiny star, a nod to the dance card she once marked next to your name. When the light catches it, the 5 points wink like they know what you're up to. A memory surfaces, the beach at dawn, cold iron in the air, her scarf lifting like a white flag that refused to surrender. You rub your thumb over the ring's rim until it feels as smooth as a wave-worn shell, the kind that rides around in a coat pocket reminding fingers there's an ocean somewhere. The next day, you test your courage in the machine shop, because there's straight and then there's straight. The corporal on duty eyes your project with the solemnity of a jeweler. "Can't officially help," he says, already reaching for a mandrel. "But it'd be a shame if a fella's dowel were a hair off round." He gives the ring 3 firm taps and a priestly hum. "There, more circle, less oval, unless you were going for Art Deco." "I'll claim Art Deco if it goes wrong," you answer. Joke 2 earns an unlicensed smirk. "Engrave it?" he asks, tipping his head toward the graver. "Already scratched it," you admit, showing the inside. He peers. "Neat hand. Love survives bad tools," he says. He hands the ring back wrapped in a square of soft cloth torn from an old polishing wheel. You thank him with the currency of the realm, 2 decent cigarettes and a promise not to mention his choirboy precision to anyone who might assign him creative latrine duty. Evening brings rain that smells like wet rope and distant sea. The ration wine night scent, and you find her under the eave of the barracks, hair tucked behind one ear, coat collar turned up. you decide not to make a speech. Speeches are for platforms and chaplains. You have a small circle and a pocket full of intentions. I made you something, you say, feeling your heartbeat auditioning for the drum section again. You hold the ring in your palm, not presenting it so much as offering it the way you'd offer the last piece of bread. Shyly, hopefully, with a readiness to laugh if you've misjudged the flavor. She doesn't reach right away. She looks at you first, the way she did under blackout lamps, measuring distance by breath rather than steps. Then she takes it with her glove off, because important things deserve skin. It's warm, she says, surprised, though you've been carrying it against your palm the whole walk over. She turns it, nose wrinkling a little as she catches the mint. Toothpaste? The jeweller's secret, you say gravely. Also excellent against plaque and fascism. Joke 3 slips out, and she laughs, the sound soft but echoing all the same. She slides it onto her middle finger, your guess wasn't terrible, and flexes her hand, testing whether love and aluminum understand each other's grammar. It fits, she says, more relief than triumph. You feel taller for a second, then remember gravity and come back to regulation height. She lifts the ring to the light, sees the tiny star, and then, because she's her, tilts it to catch the initials inside. Her mouth softens. You remembered the card, she says. Room was loud, you answer. Paper was louder. You walk. No destination, just the kind of drifting that lets streets decide who you are tonight. The no jitterbugging sign lives only in memory on this route, but you nod to its ghost anyway. She holds her hand out now and then to make the ring shimmer, as if catching sunlight in a jar and letting it out in sips. Another memory taps on the glass, the foxhole cigarette, orange ember, shuttling between hands until it became a treaty. You realize this ring is a quieter version of that. A small glow passed between you, promising a warmth the weather can't order around. When this is over, she says, always that doorway phrase, you can hear the wind-down bench being delivered to the future, slats sanded smooth, a thermos learning your names. We'll see if your jewelry skills transfer to installing a rosebush trellis. You nod solemnly. I have a degree in tying string to nails. Summa cum laude? With honours in pretending it's level. She stops at the bridge over the river. The water glides under the arches, black silk with a rumour of stars. She holds her hand over the railing, lets the ring catch the faint light, then drops it to her chest, as if returning a locket. It's not gold, you say, preemptive apology sneaking in. No, she answers, it's lighter. I can carry it everywhere. You tuck that line in your pocket beside the photograph. If words could be metal, you'd hammer that one into a band too. Mainstream fact you mutter to the ledger. Men and women fashion rings from aircraft aluminum, brass shell casings, and even melted down coins across bases and fronts. The British called it trench art long before this war, and by now the craft has chapters written in every theatre from the Pacific to North Africa. You add the fringe bit you love. Some hospital wards taught patients to carve clear rings from aircraft perspex, and under certain lights those rings seem to hold a ghost of the sky they once touched. Back at the barracks door, the rain pauses as if someone upstairs is listening properly. She looks at you with that steady, unhurried gaze she reserves for real things and letter endings. Keep making circles, she says, tapping your chest lightly where the photo rides. Keep returning. Later, in the bunk's dim, you take out paper. You draw a ring for the margin and label it poorly like a museum that's doing its best with a short staff. Aircraft moonlight, polished with mint, engraved with a song. You add a footnote in your head where footnotes belong. Historians still argue whether these small objects were promises or just proofs, but you decide not to put that on the page. You already know your vote. You tuck the finished letter on top of the lavender one in the tin, inhale the mingled scents of metal, mint, and maybe the idea of roses. The ring's bright circle lingers behind your eyelids after you blow out the lamp. A circle is a promise that forgot where it ends. You sleep convinced that forgetting is the point. The ship's horn cuts through the fog, low and resonant, vibrating in your chest like a held note. You're standing at the edge of the pier, coat collar turned up against the salt wind. The boards under your boots are damp and slick, creaking as the tide shifts beneath them. Around you, families, sweethearts and friends cluster in little knots, the air buzzing with a mix of joy, nerves, and the smell of diesel. She's somewhere in that crowd, and you spot her before she sees you, standing just far enough from the crush that the wind can catch her scarf. She's scanning the deck, the pier, the gangway, like she's trying to locate you on 3 different maps at once. You move toward her, weaving through people and steamer trunks, until you're close enough to see the relief ease into her shoulders. Historians still argue whether reunions at ports were the truest kind of homecoming, or just another stop on a soldier's long road back to themselves. Some point to the photographs, smiling faces, arms thrown around each other, as proof that this was joy in its purest form. Others say the real homecoming didn't happen until the uniforms were hung up for good. You're not thinking about either theory now, you're just closing the last few feet between you. The quirky truth? In some ports, the first person off a ship wasn't allowed to be a passenger at all. It was a customs officer or a clerk carrying a clipboard. The second person might be a sailor with orders to keep the crowd back, which means that for most people, those picture-perfect leaps into each other's arms happened a few steps later than they do in the movies. She doesn't leap. Instead, she reaches for your coat sleeve, fingers curling just enough to make sure you're solid and not some trick of the mist. You take her other hand and pull her closer, the smell of her hair instantly more real than the diesel or the sea. You don't say much. What's there to say that isn't already there in the grip of her hands, the weight of her against your chest? Around you, the pier is chaos. Crates thump onto the planks, voices call names into the din. Somewhere, a brass band starts up, with a tune that's half march, half celebration. You both ignore it, walking slowly toward the far end of the pier, where the crowd thins and the view opens to the water. She asks about the voyage, and you tell her about the endless meals of tinned stew, the days when the sea was glass, and the night you woke to the sound of something heavy sliding across the deck in the dark. You leave out the parts that would make her frown. In return, she tells you about the weeks leading up to this, how she found a better tailor for her coat, how the violets in the pail behind the barracks fence bloomed twice. When you reach the end of the pier, you stop and lean on the railing. The water below swirls grey and green, catching the pale light in shifting patterns. You remember the bridge where she once held out her hand to catch the light on the ring you made her. She's wearing it now, and you catch yourself glancing at it more than once. The ship's horn sounds again, softer now, and you both know it means the last few passengers are coming down the gangway. Soon the pier will empty, the fog will lift, and the tide will cover the scent of arrival. But right now you let the moment stand, 2 figures side by side at the edge of the water, holding on as if the pier might lift anchor and drift away without them. The church smells faintly of beeswax and damp stone, the air cool enough that you can see your breath when you first step inside. There are no flowers, those are hard to come by, but someone's draped the altar with a piece of clean linen, and a single brass candlestick burns steadily at one side. She's already there, standing near the front, smoothing the hem of a borrowed dress. It's not white. It's a pale cream that catches the light like paper left out in the sun. Her hair is pinned simply, though one curl refuses to stay in place, resting against her cheek like it's claiming the day as its own. Historians still argue whether wartime weddings were acts of optimism or urgency. Some say they were fueled by the ticking clock of deployment, a way to claim a piece of the future before the war could take it. Others believe they were a kind of rebellion, proof that even under rationing and air raid sirens, people would keep making vows and carving rings from aluminum. The quirky truth? Many wartime brides wore dresses sewn from parachute silk, soft, pale fabric that had once hung in the sky. Sometimes the seams still held faint traces of the original stitching. Today her dress is made from something simpler, but you imagine it could hold the wind just as well if it had to. The chaplain's voice is quiet but steady, rising and falling in the familiar rhythm of vows. You keep your eyes on her, the words finding their way out of your mouth almost without effort. She doesn't look away, not even when you feel your voice catch at the edges. Someone produces a ring, not the one you made from aircraft metal, but a thin gold band borrowed from her aunt, meant to be replaced when things settle down. You slide it onto her finger, noticing how light it feels, how quickly it looks like it's always belonged there. Outside, the air smells faintly of rain, though the sky is still clear. A few people throw handfuls of rice, though it's more symbolic than generous. Grain isn't something to waste these days. You both laugh as it lands in your hair and rolls down your collars. There's no grand reception, just a table at the corner cafe, 2 cups of coffee, and a slice of cake someone managed to procure through whispered favours. The icing is uneven, the sponge a little dense, but it's the best thing you've tasted in months. She cuts it in half, swapping the larger piece onto your plate without a word. When you walk her home later, the street is almost empty. You're still holding her hand when you pass the no jitterbugging sign in the hall window of the community centre. She glances at it, then at you, and grins. "We're breaking that rule someday," she says. "You promise you will." That night, back in your quarters, the scent of beeswax and rain clings to your clothes. You take out the aluminum ring from your pocket and turn it in your fingers before setting it carefully beside the gold one in your mind, where both can stay. 2 promises made in different languages but meaning the same thing. The war doesn't end with a single shout or a neat line drawn on a map. It ends in fragments. Bits of news carried by word of mouth, headlines posted crooked in cafe windows, a strange lightness in the air that no one dares name too soon. You're standing in the square when the word finally feels solid enough to believe it's over. Around you, people begin moving differently. Some laugh too loudly, others cry without hiding it. A group of soldiers near the fountain start singing, the tune uneven but determined. You find her in the crowd, and for a moment you both just stand there, taking it in. The silence between you isn't hesitation. It's the weight of understanding that you've survived something that could have ended either of you. Historians still argue whether peace arrives all at once or in stages. Some say it comes like a switch flipped, while others insist it trickles in, one cautious breath at a time. Right now it feels like both, like the air is full of trumpets and yet still holding its breath. The quirky truth? In some towns, the end of the war was announced not with fanfare but by the simple act of switching the street lamps back to full brightness after years of blackout. You see it happen here. One by one, the lamps flare to life, spilling gold light onto the cobblestones, chasing the shadows into corners where they'll stay. You and she walk without planning a direction. The streets are busier than they've been in years, but every familiar place looks new in this light. At the cafe, people sit at tables, spilling onto the pavement, raising glasses to anyone who passes. You're offered a drink more than once, but you keep walking, her hand warm in yours. When you reach the river, you stop at the same bridge where she once tilted her hand to catch the light on the ring you made. She does it again now, but the light is different, brighter, freer. The water below runs fast, carrying away months and years in its current. You talk about what comes next. Not in grand plans, but in pieces. A bench in a garden, the smell of violets, bread that doesn't crumble like ration biscuits. She says she wants to dance again, properly this time, and you tell her you'll find a hall with a floor that's been waiting for you. As the night deepens, you walk her home. The windows are open for the first time in years and music drifts out into the street. She pauses at her door, looking at you for a long moment. "We made it," she says. You nod because there's nothing else to say that would be truer. Later, in your room, you take the photograph from your pocket. The edges are more worn now, the image softer, but it's still her. You set it beside the aluminum ring on the table and lie back, listening to the distant hum of a city relearning how to breathe. For the first time in a long time, you let yourself believe that tomorrow might simply be another day, and that you'll both be there to see it. And now the story slows. You can feel the edges of it soften, the bright sounds of the square fading into a gentle hum, the light of those street lamps settling into a steady glow. Imagine the weight of your boots lifting from your feet, the ache of the march dissolving into something lighter, quieter. The war is gone now, and in its place is the slow turning of ordinary days. The streets are calm. You can hear the faint echo of a gramophone somewhere, the notes curling like smoke through an open window. The air smells of bread baking in an oven that hasn't known rationing in years, of flowers planted not for defiance, but simply for beauty. You walk past shop windows that are no longer half empty, past gardens with washing lines that sway lazily in the breeze. Somewhere ahead there's a bench beneath an apple tree. It's worn smooth from years of sitting, its paint faded, but it's waiting. The violets are still blooming in their tin pail nearby. You sit together there, shoulders touching, and let the sunlight fall over you. The river in the distance murmurs on as it always has, unconcerned with what's past, carrying only the present moment forward. You take a slow breath and let it out just as slowly. The world doesn't demand anything of you right now. Not your words, not your decisions, only your presence. You can stay here as long as you like, in the easy company of someone who knows your whole story, in a time where nothing needs to be hurried. Let the last of the noise fade. Let the weight go. The garden, the bench, the river, they'll be here when you wake.